Almost 10 years ago, May 21, 2014, I started the Hans Beekhuyzen Channel. So coming May the channel will celebrate its 10th anniversary. I'll do that by looking back a few times. This video being the first. My hi-fi adventure started when I was 16 years of age. I was still school going, but I had a side job at a white and brown goods store. I spent the money I made, and sometimes even more, on second-hand stereo equipment and vinyl. The turntable was a Lenco B52, the amp a Kleinenhummel Telewatt V56 that delivered 26 watts per channel if I remember well. The loudspeakers were the Philips 22RH426 and I bought a spanking new Revox A77 4-track tape recorder. Within 7 years that was all replaced. I had quit school and started working as a salesman at Music Staphorst at Utrecht, the Netherlands. I did that for 8 years, starting selling stereos, then specialized in cassette decks and tape recorders, and ended selling recording equipment for musicians. In the meantime, I started writing for a hi-fi magazine next to my regular job, and my articles fell good with the readers. Especially my series on microphone techniques were popular amongst the audiophile readers. It was the time that people recorded live music as a hobby. In 1980 I accepted a job at Special Audio Products in Amsterdam that sold professional and semi-professional recording equipment to theatres, studios and musicians. When in 1983 the record industry had taken a dive, I was made redundant, so I started a career as freelance audio journalist. I already wrote for Stereo Hi-Fi Test in Dutch, and within 3 months I had found sufficient work. A hi-fi magazine with the remarkable name Home Studio, the illustrious underground magazine Audio and Technique, and a magazine for the professional audio market Soundcheck, all Dutch, could use my writings. And I was asked by the UK magazine Pro Sound News to be their Dutch correspondent. I also worked a short period for some computer magazines and a sponsored Hewlett-Packard magazine where I acquired my first network knowledge. It was the beginning of digital audio and there was a lot to learn. I had started my own magazine for the professional audio market in 1989 that gave me access to even more knowledge. I remember the Digital Information Exchange in London where Sony tried to get studio owners to invest in digital recording gear. I also took part in a forum on digital audio with Alan Parsons. Attended a presentation by Jeff Skunk Baxter of Steely Dan and the Doobie Brothers, and so learned a lot on working with digital recording equipment. I also reviewed the first DCS product, an analog to digital converter for use in recording studios. At that time my stereo looked like this: a Luxman R1500 receiver, quad ESL 57 loudspeakers and a Garrett 401 turntable with SME 3009 tone arm, a Denon DL103 cartridge and a Pre on batteries, of which I don't recall the name or nor model. I also had a TEAC A7030 tape deck that I used in a small studio I had with friends that was later replaced by a Revox A700, which I still have. All but the Denon cartridge were trade-ins at Music Staphorst. Later on the turntable was replaced by a Technics SL1200 with the same SME tone arm and Denon cartridge. It ended in a Lin Sondek LP12 with external power supply, SME 5 tone arm and a Vanderhul Grasshopper cartridge, which I still have but hardly use. Even at today's standard that sounded not so bad. The sound was very open but limited in dynamics and lows. So the quads were first replaced. A pair of JBL 4311 studio monitors that I had seen on, I think, a Steely Dan album brought an upfront and almost aggressive sound that at first sounded great, but not with all music, and I do have a very broad taste where music is concerned. The next step was a French speaker that could be described as a poor man's Ellipson 1303. I forgot its name. But I wanted back to electrostatic speakers. So the next step was a hybrid system, the Van Metervoort EE/EB, a two-way system with electrostatic mid-highs unit in a pole and a mid-low system in isobaric setting. I also replaced the amp with a Van Metervoort amp. After that I lost a bit of track, with the exception of two Martin Logans, the Aries and the Vista, again if I remember well. Those were a problem since our house has an open kitchen, 3 cats and then 1 cigar smoking reviewer. I gave up electrostatic speakers sooner than smoking, or actually the electrostats gave up first. They were replaced by the Audiophysics Scorpio loudspeakers, which were great speakers in that price category of €5,000 a pair. Recently I shifted to the PMC Fact 12 signature loudspeakers. It's remarkable that the memories of the unit I use every day, the amp, fade so easily. After the Luxman I must have had other amps, including a Yamaha C6 preamp with SAE power amp, a pair of Prima Luna 6 tube amps, a pair of Musical Fidelity 550K amps and the Arcam AVR 600 that I used for both stereo and surround. Then I switched to the Audio Note Sorrow SE that I had upgraded by Peter van Willeswaard's company Audio Magic, who is a master in tube gear. Apart from higher quality capacitors and better tubes, a modification made it possible to connect the left and right front pre-outs of the Arcam to the power amps in the Audio Note, triggered by the Arcam. So I could use the Audiophysics Scorpio speakers as left and right front speakers for surround. After a long service, the Arcam was replaced by the NAD T758-3. Again, the Audio Note amp and the Audiophysics speakers provided left and right front speakers. Eventually the Audio Note has been replaced by the Air Acoustics AX520 amp that has as standard a processor pass-through like I had made on the Audio Note. And the left and right speakers now are, as mentioned before, the PMC Fact 12 signature loudspeakers. I waited quite a long time before buying a CD player, partly because of the sound quality that wasn't, let's say, convincing, but also partly because of budgetary reasons. But when I finally started with CD, it was the, at that time, very nice Marantz CD94. We used it for quite a long time. In the meantime I hired Peter van Willeswaard. It was the CD94 and a Denon amplifier with built-in DAC that demonstrated jitter convincingly. Or actually it was the digital interlink that caused the jitter, since it wasn't a 75 ohm cable. We didn't know it was jitter that caused the sound degradation. Peter also heard the phenomenon and reported on it in stereophile. The CD94 was later replaced by the CD80. Then I was asked by a good friend in the industry to review the TEAC VRDS-10 CD player. At that time TEAC wasn't a popular brand due to poor management and I was not interested. But my friend almost begged me to at least look at it. He didn't expect a publication of review. I asked Peter to do that and he was rather impressed. It appeared to be a restart product of TEAC and we used the player until streaming finally took over. Over time playing records became increasingly uncomfortable due to my essential tremor, shaky hands as my grandchildren say. And I was fascinated by how my son and his friends used Dad's old computer to share, store and play music. The very nice Marantz CD player I gave him was not used, not even when I gave him blank CDs to burn music on. That, together with my hands, made me highly interested in playing computer files. My first encounter with streaming was the Philips SL400i. It was, of course, a DLNA type of player that did not only do music but also video and photos. And it sounded horrible. Then came the Sim 3 player that wasn't that much better. When that company, Slim Devices, introduced the Squeeze Box and the matching Slim server, things started to look brighter for file-based audio. And when Logitech bought Slim Devices, it only took a few years before Squeezebox was eliminated. At my home, new streamers aka network players were introduced. SOTM SMS200 Standard, Ultra and Ultra Neo versions, Auralic Aries G2 and the Grim Audio Mu 1, recently replaced by the Grim Audio Mu 2. Anyone that nowadays say that file-based audio doesn't sound as good as vinyl or CD don't know his business. Playing music files requires software. It started with the Squeezebox and thus with Squeeze Server, that later became Logitech Media Server, LMS for short. Then I used iTunes to organize music and Audivana to play out to an external DAC from a Mac Mini. When Roon was introduced, I started using that immediately. And I still do. A number of DACs passed by. Chord QDB76, a Chord Hugo, a Mytek Brooklyn, a Denafrips Aries, a Denafrips Terminator Plus, and a Chord Dave, and now the major DAC in the Grim Mu 2. When a friend told me very enthusiastically about the influence an audio-grade network switch had on the sound, I was not directly interested. I couldn't see how a switch could improve the sound quality. But I couldn't help being fascinated. So I requested an AccuFox AccuSwitch Special Edition. And I was blown away. As you know, my ears are leading and I couldn't measure network tech anyway. I clearly heard jitter being reduced. I then reviewed the Silent Angel Bond B8, which was clearly less expensive and also slightly less convincing. The SOTM SNH10G was of the same quality as the AccuFox but had an SFP cage, so it could be used with fiber. Then came the Uptone Audio Ether Regen, now called Gen 1. That was less expensive than the AccuFox and the SOTM and performed very well. I still use it in my setup 2 and 3. Setup 1B now uses the Network Acoustics Eno passive filter, while in setup 1A I use the Network Acoustics Muon Pro passive filter. The influence on the Grim players is very limited, but they do a great job on other players. Changing equipment that frequently doesn't only cost a lot of money, it also makes you learn to optimize your stereo. Every step upwards improves the sound, when chosen wisely of course, but it also lowers the negative influence the room has on the sound. This has puzzled me for a long time. Take for instance the piano in the living room. It doesn't suffer from room modes the way stereos often do. And indeed did with me. But my current setup 1 is almost free of audible room modes, while the only acoustic treatment is the PSI AVA active bass trap. And although technically not acoustic treatment, the Stack Audio over 70 loudspeaker isolators lowered the influence of the room on the sound quality too. I first had a theory that time smearing might be of influence on the acoustics, but after a presentation on the Grim Audio Mu 2, one of the developers of the Grim Major DAC, Gertjan Groot-Hulze, explained to me that since their DAC has very low time smearing and noise modulation, it makes it easier for the auditory system to distinguish between the sound coming from the speakers and the sound coming from the room. So much has happened since I started writing almost half a century ago. When I look at my book, published 8 years ago, I realize it's outdated, so I plan on writing a new one. I'm also grateful that my ears are still functioning very good. I see a lot of people of my age wearing hearing aids. Must be in my DNA. Both my father and my mother never needed hearing aids during their lives. My mother even had a very sensitive hearing, close to hyperacusis. She hated loud sounds. So I might be just lucky, although I always avoided high sound pressure levels or wore hearing protection. See my playlist About Your Ears for more on hearing. Which brings us to the end of this video. As usual, there will be a new video next Friday at 5 PM Central European Time. If you don't want to miss that, subscribe to my channel or follow me on Facebook, Instagram or LinkedIn so you will be informed when new videos are out. Help me reach even more people by giving this video a thumb up or link to this video on the social media. It is much appreciated. Many thanks to those viewers that support this channel financially. It keeps me independent and lets me improve the channel further. If that makes you feel like supporting my work too, the links are in the comments below this video on YouTube. I'm Hans Beekhuyzen, thank you for watching and see you next week. And whatever you do, enjoy the music.